Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys Discussing Software. This is episode 10 and my name is Tomas O'Leary, and today we're going to talk about the impact of mega vendors and the restrictions they put on procurement. I'm joined as usual on this Two Guys Discussing Software program by my very good friend and colleague Brendan Walsh, and we're not actually physically looking at each other this week. I feel very sad, Brendan. Are you there?
I'm here. And I was just about to remind you that it was two Irish guys, but because I can't see you, but it's good to talk to you, Tomas. How are things?
We're doing really well. I kind of missed your company, the physical part of seeing you, because it's good. This is going to be a little tricky to run our first podcast remotely, which is, I guess, in the current circumstances with coronavirus being so publicly out there. Maybe this is how podcasts will happen over the next number of months if there's some of those restrictions that come in. How are you doing? You're doing okay?
I'm very good. Yeah, I'm surviving. Been pretty busy here, surviving the really bad weather. I don't know if you've been traveling a bit. I've been traveling a bit, but yeah, not too bad. Very busy, trying to keep up with some of the news reel that's going on for the podcast. But yeah, in good form. Definitely watching the coronavirus and seeing what the impact of that is. My folks are actually in a coronavirus area at the moment in Tenerife, so they're just talking to them earlier on and hoping they get back safe. Because somebody apparently in Italy has taken down a hotel and there's 1,000 people confined. They're 2 blocks away, so very much top of mind in our household.
Wow. Okay. Well, listen, we're going to be joined. You remember Richard Beaumont, who we met in Frankfurt last year and in Amsterdam. We're going to have a great chat with him. He's a senior vice president of procurement in the Co-op Group in the UK and Rolls-Royce, amongst many other organizations. So really excited about talking to him later on. But when we actually finished the last podcast, Brendan, the biggest news in our world, in the world of, obviously this is the mega vendor software world, but in this very specific one that you and I live in, which is mostly the IBM world, the biggest news in 8 years came out of IBM the day we launched the last podcast. And that was Ginny Rometty leaving IBM. It's just quite astonishing.
It was one of those where were you when moments, you know? And I remember where I was because you texted me that evening saying, how did we miss this on our podcast? And I said, well, we missed it because actually we had finished recording the podcast. I think she was in Davos at the time or something like that?
She just come back from Davos, but we have been doing 9 of these podcasts, and we've been trying to predict her demise. And the day we record and the day we publish is the day she steps down. 8 years. Can you believe that? 8 years ago, she took over from Sam Palisano. It really is quite incredible. You're the man with the numbers. Give me some of the highlights there.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable, actually, her performance over the past 8 years. And, you can scour the web trying to find, very specific positives, right? And you get a lot of noise about strategy and direction and so forth. But it's very hard to find, some specifics. But there are a few specifics that I think are quite stark. So the first one is, because I like to talk about stocks and shares, so there has been a 25% drop in the IBM share price since she took over. So when she took over in late 2012, the share price stood at about $193 per share. And today it's kind of hovering around $145. It was a bit lower than that. It was about $137 actually before she stepped down, and it's had a bit of a bounce since then. So you can see what the market thinks of that. Obviously, they think it's positive news. More starkly, though, the revenue back in 2012 was over 100 billion, 104, 105 billion in 2012, and at the end of 2019, so they announced their results there. Actually, just the day before our last podcast. And it was down to 77 billion in 2019. So along with the 25% reduction in the share price, that's a 25 billion drop in annual revenue.
But hang on, Brendan. She bought nearly 60 companies in that period. How do you lose $30 billion in revenue if you buy so many companies? 50. She was like something. It ranges between 57 to 60 companies over that period.
Yeah, well, I know. I mean, we know some of the companies, and I'm not sure how strategic they were in terms of the long-term vision of the company to become, more ingrained in AI and blockchain and cloud and cognitive. But yeah, it's incredible. You could actually, when you're buying 52 companies, you're actually buying the associated revenue as well. So you would have thought the revenue should go up, right? And even having spent the largest acquisition ever, I think 34 billion for Red Hat, even buying the Red Hat revenues, which would be performing well because Red Hat were doing well before IBM bought them, they still were down 25 billion in revenue. So yeah, it's quite remarkable, and it's fraught with kind of bad news. I mean, it's really hard to find anything positive. I mean, there was one period, which is around the period actually I joined you in Origina, and there was on the back of about 22 consecutive quarters of revenue decline, which tail ended kind of 2017. So 22 consecutive quarters of revenue decline. Yeah, and she was rewarded for that. Actually, she got a 68%, I think it was, increase in her overall package in 2016 to take it to something like $37 million.
Yeah, and you mentioned the share price down 26%. I was looking at some numbers myself, and S&P in the same period is up 160%, the average. That's the average. The tech average is even higher, but the average across the whole S&P. So it's quite incredible that you'd be paid so much money for really so little, and you can't just help thinking it's kind of good riddance, really. Unfortunately, she's staying on as chairman for another year.
Yeah. There was some good news though. There was some good news we've forgotten about, which actually was good news for Ginny. It wasn't actually good news for the shareholder, but yeah, she herself collected about $137 million in compensation over the first 7 years of her tenure. So that's quite positive on a personal note. So I'd say well done, Ginny, on that.
I like your positivity. There was actually there's a Facebook group, I don't know if you know it, the Watching IBM group, and they did a kind of their own survey. Everybody seemed very happy with the change. Now, I'd say those that were still working for IBM would obviously having to say that from the office, they may well have given a different view because, as you know, she scrapped the ability for IBMers to work remotely. Anyone who was still with IBM would have been doing it from the office, so may have had to give a different answer. But most people are really happy with it. And the new CEO, Arvind Krishna, he's not really outside of IBM. He's not really very well known at all. I mean, I heard he was the Red Hat man. Is that right?
Yeah, so he was the architect, although I think she was the architect behind many of the 52 other acquisitions. Yeah, he seems to be the real man behind the Red Hat deal. And that would make sense given his specific area of focus and expertise. Unlike Ginny, Ginny was former engineer for a couple of years when she joined IBM in the first few years, but then she kind of really drove sales and marketing and strategy. So she's more of a salesperson, where he's more of an engineering type. And I think... so, a different type of personality. He was born in India. Obviously, he's an Indian American. Yeah, it was reputed that Jim Whitehurst, who was the CEO of Red Hat, might actually be in line for the throne. But then, yeah, he got the top job, and very much supported by Ginny Rometty, I think, according to what I hear. So, yeah, I don't know a huge amount about him, but a very different personality. Maybe it'll be a positive thing.
Yeah, well, maybe it's a thing of anything's better. But what's going to happen, really? I mean, that's the thing. All of the predictions, we obviously know the share price jumped. What's going to happen to IBM? It's got over 300,000 employees. I mean, I've seen speculation out there. People are talking about maybe the sale of global business system services, the GBS business, the GTS business, which is their technology services and technology business, which includes the mainframe, I think, revenue bundled in there. Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of rumors going around. They're going to break the company up. I mean, these have been going around for a long time now. But really, let's say we know obviously in the software space, there's been a number of companies that they've sold off. They've sold off some of their assets to HCL, as we know, last year, and a number of other companies last year on the software side. But really, nothing of any major volume has gone for quite some time. I think the last major deal was obviously 2004 when they sold the PC business to Lenovo. They've sold their chip making business to Global Foundries, but I think that actually they had to hand over revenue to get rid of that one. So there's been no major sale of any part of their business for quite some time. And really, that probably is what they need to do, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they've been selling off bits of legacy, as we know. We've talked about it on other shows. Nothing kind of majorly impactful. But the thing is, if they're going through this period of change and they do sell off some of those kind of major business lines like Global Business or GBS, that's going to have a downward impact on revenue as well. So, they're going to continue, I think, to kind of to lose revenue from their install base. If they sell off another piece of the business, then that will have an impact on their overall revenue. But maybe that's what they need to do if they're really going to focus and transform the company and become a leader in cloud. I mean, they've got a long way to come. They're like probably in fifth or sixth place when it comes to infrastructure as a service, behind Alphabet and behind Microsoft, Azure, etc. And then they probably really need to restructure. And I think you're right. They probably need to sell off, break up the company a little bit. So we'll see some dramatic moves.
Yeah. So it'll be very interesting to see, and I think Arvind has a very interesting job ahead of him. I wonder how IBM clients are thinking about this, and particularly those on the procurement side. There'll be lots of opportunities. You might talk to Richard about that later on, actually. What sort of opportunities?
Yeah, for sure.
Could that generate for IBM customers? There were a few other things that happened. I mean, I know for us that was kind of the main news that we were talking about for the best part of a week or two there when the news came out. I mean, Larry Ellison's been in the news again. Did you hear about him? And he's done a big fundraiser for Trump, and apparently Twitter went crazy. And his own staff, for the first time ever, walked out. I mean, we've seen walkouts in Google, we've seen walkouts in some other organizations, but never seen a walkout in Oracle before. I mean, Larry runs that business with an iron. Well, actually, I think it's a samurai sword is what he runs it with, but an iron fist or iron something. But his staff are walking out on him.
I mean, they even went so far to make the point, because they were probably afraid of what might happen. Some of the staff took vacation time, or so that they wouldn't get caught logging off on the job, so to speak. So yeah, quite the backlash. I mean, I think the Oracle Code of Ethics book was our manual was taken out and kind of brandished around the place, because people felt that it was a violation of some of the Oracle principles. That's what people are standing for. It was kind of standing up for some of the principles that the company seemingly has documented internally. So that's kind of what it was about. But yeah, pretty interesting. Can't imagine Larry was too happy.
Yeah, no. Well, apparently people started picking up on a previous New Yorker magazine piece about Larry when he wanted to live forever, and his $370 million he invested into aging research. And I saw a great requote of a quote he made. His quote was, "Death has never made any sense to me," according to Larry. Yes. And how can a person be there and then just vanish? Well, I think it probably could say the same thing about some of their contracts and the links to their contracts. That they have a tendency to just be there one moment, these hot links, and then vanish.
Oh, yeah. 404.
No longer there.
Link not found. Yeah.
They just move it to a different location. That's a pretty philosophical kind of question. I'll ask my theologian friends, see what they say about that. But yeah, he's interesting man.
Yeah, we're talking about tricks. They're the sort of tricks that they do. I mean, the other piece of news that was out in the last couple of weeks was the case that Google and Oracle have been running for about 10 years now. This is around the Android and the use of software interfaces, basically Java and APIs around that in Android, and Oracle's desire to extend copyright restrictions around that. Now, our friends IBM and indeed Microsoft have kind of bandied with Google on the side of Google, whereas Oracle is actually trying to take them on one by one. So it looks like there's a real divide here in the industry. But again, it's back to this whole. I mean, we're going to bring this back to the topic of restrictions, because we're going to just pick up on Richard now in a minute. But it really is the restrictions we're seeing that big mega vendors. There's always an angle, isn't there? There's always an angle, isn't that right?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, and Oracle seems to be at the forefront of it at the moment as well. I mean, there's I was reading recently about the City of Sunrise Firefighters Pension Fund, and they're on their third complaint against Oracle for guess what? Deliberately inflating its cloud revenue to deceive investors. So basically what they're doing is they're going to their customers with their various cloud offerings, which in fact insiders and staffers would actually say are somewhat defect ridden, but that's kind of another point. But it's basically saying that they go into their clients and they threaten their customers with expensive audits unless they agree to use their product, unless they agree to use the Oracle Cloud software. So that so that's kind of one sales tactic. It's interesting. Or the other thing they do is they offer their clients large discounts on their existing on-premise products if they accept short-term cloud contracts. So they want to basically inflate, even in the short term, the cloud revenue numbers to deceive investors. Knowingly doing this when they realize that actually customers will then opt out and not renew after the initial short-term period is up. So the pension funds are going after the basis saying they're deceiving them, they're deceiving their investors, and actually that there's some insider trading going on the back of this. So it's very much on topic with today's discussion.
Yeah, no, it's nasty business. It's nasty business. I'm going to bring in our guest, Brendan, and he's like me. He's not physically with us. Clearly, he's in a different geography completely. Richard Beaumont, welcome. I believe you're with us now. Is that correct?
I'm certainly with you in spirit from the far-flung reaches of Vancouver, Canada, where I'm currently stuck. But that's a different story for another time.
Very good, very good. Richard, delighted to have you on our podcast and really delighted to get you to give us some insights on your kind of specialization of procurement and your experiences of dealing with some of these mega vendors. I hope you enjoyed our kind of our little chat earlier about some of the bigger ones, and in particular, I'm sorry we had to spend so much time on IBM, but for us that was pretty big news, that change in IBM. I mean, I don't know whether you know this, but IBM traditionally, up until Ginny Rometty, would have required often their CEOs to step down at the age of 60. And I think Ginny is 62, possibly 63. I think she's 62. So that's the first time it's gone past the age of 60. It probably does it create an opportunity for procurement specialists? Does it, or is it, Bill McDermott stepped down from SAP and it was business as usual? Or is that an opportunity, do you think?
Do you know what I often look at the sort of the goings on in large companies with a truly English raised eyebrow, in the sense that what they seem to do at the top of the company bears no relation to the experience of them. But there are just some things, and I think your example of dear old Microsoft and near-death experiences, where you just think the way that companies behave at the top is really going to start to affect the way that other businesses are willing to work with them. But it just seems that the amount of largesse that goes on and the amount of low performance, it kind of encourages me when I look at my end of year accounts that maybe I'm not doing so badly.
Yeah, and do they operate, like, do they all operate the same way then? Are they kind of, you meet one, you've met them all? I mean, there really is, the mega vendors have a quite a reputation in the marketplace. I mean, obviously businesses rely very heavily on their technology, and the mega vendors themselves should rely on the revenue, but it seems to be the power. No, in a normal scenario, you'd expect the buyer has more of the power. In the mega vendor relationship, it seems that whole thing has been spun on its head. Is that not the case?
You are completely right. Anybody who knows me will know of my deep-seated love for Oracle. And Oracle have made it their mission to turn it on their head, which is basically they offer you a lovely product, you buy it, and once you're in, they're just going to beat you to death with a licensing agreement for eternity. And that just doesn't even come with a smile. It just comes with an extraction of cash from your business. And it actually is truly annoying. The good news is that they're not all the same. Companies behave like people. And, if you meet a guy in the pub and they treat you decently, even if you don't quite get where they're coming from, you're going to have a beer with them. But if you meet a guy in the pub and he's just going to keep extracting money from you, it's never going to work. And for me, there are just some mega vendors that are the guys that extract the money. And there are some mega vendors who actually do behave like people. And if you have the right relationship, you get there. So it isn't one size fits all.
Yeah, but Richard, Brendan here, like, so you meet the guy in the pub, right? And you're, getting into a relationship with them. And I've been there. I've been the guy, been the sales guy in the pub, and seems like a nice guy. And you go to the people buy off people scenario, even at the time when it's, and then it changes, like it goes from being, yeah, we've had a nice conversation. Hey, he was a nice guy, but then you've bought into the company, and then the company changes, and the nice guy goes away. Like, do people not see that coming? It just seems like it's very, a tired thing. Like, is there something there that we could avoid, in the future?
As a procurement person, the biggest challenge isn't actually the guy in the pub and whether they're going to stick to what they've said or not. It's the fact that you've got 10 years of history in a business where other people in your organization have met other guys in the pub and they've done some business with them. So when you come into an organization and you're saying, okay, what is my relationship with any one of the mega vendors? You actually can't even put it all on a single piece of paper. You don't know what you've got. You don't know what you signed up to. You don't know what the contract is. You don't know what the terms are. And often the biggest fear factor for a procurement team, and even for the stakeholders that buy this stuff, is understanding even what they've got and what they got themselves into. Not just with one guy, but with several guys. And do you know what? It's so scary. People just don't bother. They avoid it. They just pay the renewal.
Yeah, but then you've got yourself into a cycle, right? So what we're talking about today is, the restrictions, the mega vendor restrictions. But having observed it then, so you've observed it, you realize, hey, this is not, rosy. We're not being treated particularly well. It gets out into the market. I go to lots of conferences. People talk about this all the time, about the mega vendors and the stranglehold and all these topics. I mean, it's even presented on stage. So are there no alternatives? I mean, are people not looking to alternative markets, to other providers rather than the big, 5 or 6 vendors all the time? I mean, they continue to do the same. It's a sign of madness, isn't it, to continue to do the same thing over and over again? Why don't organizations look to alternatives and to break that cycle?
Do you know what? I think it's fear and I think it's knowledge. And, if you take the common cycle, right, it is, I have a bunch of stuff from a mega vendor. I have sort of got an idea of what I've got, but I'm not bang up to date. And I certainly haven't got everything being asset managed correctly. I get some threatening letter from a mega vendor that says, right, well, it's time for us to come and check what you've got. And then it's a bit like when you take your car to a garage. If you don't understand mechanics and they start sucking through their teeth, then you're going to pay because you're worried about whether it's going to keep working. So the mega vendor says to you, well, look, we've had a look. There's a bit of non-compliance. It could cost a bit of money, but we can make it all go away if we just move you on to our next kind of agreement for moving this to the cloud or something else. And do you know what? Rather than face up to it, because people don't have the knowledge and because they're worried about the risk of being either caught out or charged money, they'll just put the package through. It comes in a new shiny agreement and everything then looks good for the next 6 to 12 months. And you'll never break the cycle. What changes it is when you get someone who's prepared to say, I don't understand what I've got. I don't know how to talk to these guys. I don't know whether what they're offering me is good value or not. I need to go and get a third-party opinion. And that's the bit that breaks the cycle.
Isn't there a bit, Richard, that it's like playing a game of football without a referee, though? And the game starts fine, but once one of the teams starts playing a little bit dirty, then without a referee on the pitch, the only way you either be bullied and get beaten up by the opposition, or you play dirty yourself. And if you talked about the garage, at least in the car maintenance world, there are certain rules and regulations. In most industries, there are. There's absolutely no referee on the pitch at all. And I think what really is needed here, personally, is a bit of help. You need to put a referee on the pitch. Now, who puts a referee on the pitch? Well, it's unfortunately it's a level of regulation in some shape or form. And we know at the moment regulations being talked about in lots of areas, but absolutely some form of regulation should be very beneficial for procurement professionals and businesses. Would it not?
Oh, do you know what? Listen, I completely agree. I think if we think about the EU decision, and you'll know better than me when it was to allow the reselling of licenses, right? That even a year, 2 years, 3 years after that decision, there were still mega vendors who were denying the existence of that fundamental right for a company to sell on something that it had bought. And they would still tell you that, you couldn't, or it wasn't legit, or you couldn't transfer it. And so this idea of having a referee, I think, is a really good example, which is, if the best person, you're talking about IBM, if I don't understand IBM licensing, the person that I want on the pitch helping to referee is someone who either used to sell or run IBM licensing, who's freelance, who I can get in and say, explain what they're doing to me. What is this? What am I allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do? And to get proper advice. Because look, with the best one in the world, if I don't do that, I'm constantly going to get bullied on the pitch. Because look, I'm one person. They are a very large company, even if they're smaller than they were before their previous CEO got hold of them. So yeah, it's help. It's finding an expert who can sit down and say, this is what you're really dealing with.
Yeah, but you have to pay for that help. I mean, that referee surely in most cases, the referee should be the market, have a level of refereeing going on in any event. And I think that's what it's definitely missing. Because you look at some of the tricks and tactics that they take in. Look at Apple. There was only recently France competition and fraud watchdog posed a penalty on Apple for secretly slowing down older iPhones. Now, we all know this has been going on for a couple of years, Apple have put their hand up and said they're going to not do it. But so some of these fines are for what happened maybe a little while ago. But still, it's a classic example of the sort of tricks that these guys do. And I mean, we had the joke earlier about Larry Ellison's quote from a couple of years ago, where he said, "How can a person be there and then just vanish?" Well, how can the hot links to their terms and conditions that were there when you first signed the contract be there and then be gone the next minute? I mean, there's all these tricks that they do. It makes it very difficult, doesn't it, for procurement professionals to really do their job?
Well, and I tell you what, it goes to a whole new level, because look, if I'm buying, think of an example. Let's say I'm buying coffee for my company, right? And I'm dealing with a international coffee firm, and they start to behave this way. Terms and conditions go awry, pricing goes awry, customer service goes wrong, penalty clauses. Frankly, I can just ditch them. And I can go to another coffee seller that I like, that I've got all the behaviors that I admire, and I can see they've got the certificates for sustainability and environmental and, fair trade coffee, and off we go. It's just not like that with a mega vendor. If I'm locked in to an ERP system, I'm locked into an ERP system. I can't just turn around to the company and say, do you know what? I'm really fed up with Oracle. They're treating us like this. I think we should just start using SAP tomorrow. It's impossible. So with a mega vendor, not only have you got the bad behavior, but you've also got huge supplier power that they really have got hold of you, because trying to get out of them is impossible. So here's the deal. It's, there has to be, and we see it across quality, we see it across environmental, we see it across IT security compliance. Gradually, the market starts to drive standards and compliance. And maybe that is something that we need, that's on behavior and on customer protection. But you know what? I think the really big change, and it's you mentioned the conversations at conferences, I think this is in the open now. People aren't afraid anymore to keep quiet about the fact that they've had a bad experience with a mega vendor. You and I were in Frankfurt together. You could hear people saying, I have got this with this company and I'm having a bad time and it's costing us money. Now, those conversations weren't happening 5 years ago. And you've got to believe that the combination of legislation, rights for people, plus customer feedback that says, actually, our reputation is going down the toilet here, that they would have to respond. My concern, they're just in such a monopolistic market that their speed at which they might respond is going to be a lot slower than we would like, right?
So Richard, on that point, I mean, one of the big reasons why at these conferences we hear people saying, they're complaining, or they're complaining about the relationship, or they're complaining about the cost is, I think it's audit, right? So audit is a big issue, and I'm sure you've been on the receiving end of these, the various places that you. So, like, they're very frustrating, these audits. So, like, what can you give us some examples of some of the, maybe the tactics or some of the more frustrating things that you've seen from an audit point of view?
Yeah, delighted to. So I was working with an insurance client. They ran the licensing for software for the organization globally. They were in the process of implementing a software asset management system. They had, in fact, a very large vendor helping them with that process. And during the implementation, they quite rightly wrote to their top 80% of software suppliers to say, we're loading everything in. We want to check we're right. We want to share it. And you know what? Instead of behaving with, well, that's great. Of course, we're delighted. If you're managing it well, it gives us a good chance. Nearly every single one of them took it as an opportunity to launch an unexpected audit on the company. And what they did was they came in and they said, right, we know you're loading it. Give us your results straight away of what you think you've got. And almost to a company, they turned around and said, well, we think that's wrong. You owe us money. You're using more.
Oh.
So it's, and that's just bad behavior. I mean, just if we come back to our bloke in the pub, that's the bloke that you walk away from, right?
Yeah.
But
that's crazy, isn't it? It's totally crazy.
Madness.
And I'm just wondering, at the end, when that happens, I mean, because procurement is not just about buying; it's about it's the broader relationship you have to have with the vendors. How does that?
Yeah.
How does that create the relationship? What's the relationship like after that happens? How do you fix things?
Do you know what? It's awful, and the reason it's awful is because you've got it's like any relationship that's a triangle. Things never go well. You've got your IT guys, you've got procurement, and you've got the supplier. And in that impromptu audit, the supplier knows that they're going to kick off an argument between IT and procurement about whose fault it is that they're either using too much, or they don't know what they've got, or they don't know what they paid for it, and they don't know where the contract is. So inside the company, you start this wonderful bickering row. And the only winner out of that is the mega vendor, because they just say, look, when you've calmed down, here's the new agreement, just pay for it and off you go. And after that's been signed, the IT guys are they're annoyed because they got brought into the fight. They've got what they wanted and now they can just get back to what they're doing. Procurement are feeling really bruised because they had to raise it, they've had to deal with it, and they've had to deal with all the unpleasantness. And now the IT guys don't like them for stirring the bucket. And they don't want to talk to the mega vendor because, as far as they're concerned, the only reason it went wrong in the first place is because the mega vendor lobbed a grenade into the pot. How do you have a relationship with anybody that works after that has happened? It's just never going to work, right?
No, never going to work. Never going to work. Richard, you've had a lot of experience in procurement. You've had a lot of experience dealing with these guys. If you were to give one piece of advice to people who are either early stage of their career in procurement or early stage of dealing with some of these mega vendors and in whatever shape or form they come in. And the mega vendors of today will be different to the mega vendors of tomorrow. Of course, I think we all know that. What would you say? Is there one piece of wisdom you could give somebody coming into the industry or who's in it and coming across these sort of problems today?
Dead easy. Talk to an expert and get advice. All right. It doesn't matter who you are. You could be a 1 million company. You could be $100 billion company. You are going to have the same problem if you go head to head with a mega vendor because they've got you. Go and talk to someone who can genuinely explain to you how that mega vendor works, how they structure their commercials, and what their product and licensing mean, and just take advice on how to do it. It's a get the chaperone to go to the ball, because if you just go to the ball by yourself, you're probably not going to have the best dance.
And one last question: who is your favorite mega vendor?
It's not Oracle, but do you know what? I quite like Microsoft. In my experience, they have, in many different previous roles, they have behaved properly. And by properly, I mean they're the bloke in the pub who, even when they've got some bad news to deliver, will then continue to stay with you to help you get it sorted.
Well, if their CEO Satya Nadella is a very hard man to find any juicy stuff on, so hence why we don't mention him at the beginning. Listen, Richard, thank you so much. We really have to wrap this up, and thank you so much, Brendan. Any final words?
No, that was great fun. I enjoyed that, and thanks, Richard, for your insight. I think people find that very helpful. So take care of yourself and safe home.
Yeah, and
thanks so much, guys.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. And just to remind everybody, before we finish our goodbyes, we have a episode 11 coming out on the 20th of March. It'll be about how we're going to deal with all this aging technology that's out there in business and society today, and some of the challenges we have with recycling, repair. We've got a very good guest. We've got Umaima Haider. She is a research fellow at the Enterprise Computing Research Lab in the United Kingdom. And just also to remind everybody that we have an excellent live webinar coming up the 3rd of March, and we will be running that at 11 a.m. GMT. And that will be about IBM software contracts and how to maximize your licenses and minimize your audit risk. Thank you very much. And thank you again, Brendan. I'm so sorry that we weren't together today.
Not at all. It's been a pleasure as ever. And we'll see you soon as well. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.